Have you ever apologized to your penis?
In this episode of Men's Therapy Podcast, we dive deep into a topic that affects many men today, pornography and its impact on our lives.
The way that a man treats his penis is the way that he treats everyone and everything in the world.
Today, we have a special guest, Tyson Adams, a revolutionary men's coach who's redefining masculinity through the lens of sexuality. Tyson doesn't just help men break free from porn and sex addiction. He empowers them to unlock a multi-orgasmic experience and forge deeper connections with themselves and others.
We have to be able to look at porn and be able to see it for what it is. Porn objectifies us. We then objectify and commercialize and colonize our own bodies.
Together, we'll uncover how to reconnect with our bodies, foster healthier relationships, and ultimately reclaim a more authentic sense of masculinity.
1 drop of semen is equal to 30 drops of blood. Would you give blood every single day? And they're like, fuck no, I wouldn't give blood every single day. What would be the point of that? And I say, okay, well, then why do you masturbate every single day?
Have you ever wondered what masculinity even is in the modern era? Are you ready to move beyond the macho bully or the soy boy archetypes? I'm Marc Azoulay, and this is the Men's Therapy Podcast. Together, we'll explore how neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and Buddhist philosophy can transform your life, your marriage, and your business. Are you ready to deep dive into the minds of men? Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc Azoulay, and I'm here with Tyson Adams. He's a men's coach that focuses on sex and sexuality, not just healing from sex addiction or porn addiction, but really taking your sex life to the next level. He can help you become more multi-orgasmic and really fully connect as a dude. You know, I feel like, I'm curious what you think about this, Tyson. A lot of guys don't really connect during sex. I think we often dissociate or go into more like performance or objective role. And my sense is that you help guys actually connect with their partner. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so say a little bit about what got you into this work. How did you start going down this path and wanting to learn about sexual alchemy and sexual connection?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you, Mark, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My story is a unique one in the sense that pornography came into my life when I was quite young. I was 9 years old. Still remember it. I was in a field with one of my friends, and we came across a hole in the ground that had a board over it. We pulled back the board, and there was a treasure trove of Playboys stashed in there. And I remember reaching down, not really sure what I was getting myself into, and found the Vanna White Playboy. And the reason why I knew that one was because my mom watched Wheel of Fortune a lot. And I remember opening up the magazine, and as soon as I opened it and I saw what it was, I hit the deck, and of course, many emotions and energies are flowing through my body. And I kind of remember having 2 thoughts. One was, oh my God, I could get in, a lot of trouble right now. And then the second one was, I'm going to come back here alone, and I'm going to come back here as soon as possible. And that actually really began what was a 20-year porn addiction. Shortly thereafter, the Playboy, my hometown, I lived in a small town in Ephrata, Washington State. We were actually the first town to get fiber wire put in, underground. And so we went from basically no internet to high-speed, internet overnight. And there was this program called Kazaa, which is kind of like Napster, but it was with videos. And back then, there was no previews or thumbnails for what you were getting into. And so you would just type in search term, and then you would download it, and then boom, it was kind of like the lottery porn, because you didn't know what you were getting into. And in reflection of sort of where I'm at today and what I understand, those initial experiences with pornography were traumatizing for me, being 11 years old, prepubescent, didn't even have pubic hair, and that created all kinds of challenges inside of my relational dynamics and what I expected as I was moving into adolescence. And then when I left high school, I went to the University of Washington, and I joined a fraternity. I didn't know what a fraternity was, but my girlfriend, her brother at the time, was in one. And moving into the fraternity was shocking, because we had a server with hundreds and hundreds of indexed porn by porn star and by genre. And there was this kind of, running joke, hey, get off the damn internet because we can't do our homework, because everybody would be on it watching porn at the end of the evening. So I really grew up in sort of the belly of the beast of that misogynistic culture and normalization of pornography being the way that men were as they were kind of coming of age. So that's my story.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good things there. I wanted to kind of take it step by step. I think we're probably similar age because I was also, you know, a young adult during adolescent during like the birth of the internet in that way. I remember using Kazaa and LimeWire and all this stuff, and porn was a huge part of that, right? I mean, it was just all of a sudden it was everywhere, and it seemed like, again, I mean, obviously it wasn't an earlier generation, but it seemed like it was way more accessible. You never have to go to a store. You have to feel like a weirdo. You didn't have to subscribe to a magazine, you know. And I think a lot of us were like raised on the internet, you know, watching stuff that was, you know, way above our pay grade, like you're talking about, right? So I'm curious, in your work or in your research, like, have you seen that be a phenomena? Like, how is, I guess a more direct question is, how is porn different for the millennial generation than it was for other generations with the advent of the internet?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think is really important is to understand that the progression is incredibly steep, because we went from effectively Playboys, and then we went to Penthouse, and then we went to, obviously, you know, Kazaa and LimeWire, internet porn, and then we went to, obviously, SEO being important and realizing that there are all these weird fetishes and these eroticized wounds that are created, and then obviously lots of money got dumped into creating these to be pretty high production quality. And then obviously the sex toys started to come. And then, of course, now we're in a place where we have AI, we have VR, we have sex robots, we have the gamut of things that can satisfy these primal desires. And so where it's been and where it's going is something that I have a major pulse on, but it's also terrifying for me because, you know, there are little boys right now that are logging on with VR goggles, and the first porn that they're seeing is porn through the VR lens, which in my experience has been, you know, 100 times more addictive and more influential on the psyche and on the body than just watching it through the internet. So where we're headed is terrifying, and I'm doing my best to stay ahead of the curve to warn men and parents about what's actually happening in these spaces. So, yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I've had experiences with VR porn. It is wild. Like, it is too intense. It is, because it hacks the brain. I mean, your body and brain think that you are there in a way that just videos don't do it. So I'm curious about the advent of like kink and fetish material, because I experienced that too growing up, right? It's like stuff that was way more hardcore than what you'd find in a Playboy magazine, right? Not only is it animated, but it's, you know, a lot of brutality towards women, you know, like insane kinks, bestiality, you know, all kinds of shit, right? Humiliation, whatever, right? Yeah. Like anything was available, especially on the early internet. And I think also of like, you know, watching like snuff films, right? Or watching like insane violence also on the internet that you can also find on those sites. I think that fucked us up, you know? I think it led to a lot of men being desensitized. What do you see with the men that talk to you around that? Like, how do you come back from just having your neurons like blown out of your head from watching that stuff when you're growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I saw bestiality porn when I was very young. That was one of the things that came through on Kazaa when I didn't know what was happening. And so I think one thing I like to always start with is sort of the awareness that every man is watching pornography for a different reason. We have different needs and different realities, and we're often bypassing different types of emotional states or things that went haywire in our youth. And so I think what we're drawn to and the types of violence that we eroticize are rooted in many different things. I could say on one level, it could be the traumas that we experience in this life, but I also think that some of the things that we're drawn to are lineage burdens that we've inherited from our family systems, more on an epigenetic level. But then I'm trained as an internal family systems therapist. And so for me, understanding the nature of these different parts and the constellation of these parts, and how the absorption of the wounds that our parents carry or the sexual traumas that our parents carry often can also influence the nature of what we're drawn to or what we're aroused by. So, you know, it's just these weird fetishes. And to your point about the violence, there was a study done in 2005 that looked at the top, let's see, what was it? It was the top 10 videos in terms of played videos on the internet of porn that year. And it was something like 89% of that pornography had some level of violence in it. And so when we say violence, we're talking about obviously hitting, spanking, humiliation, all that kind of thing. And then what we're doing is we're eroticizing that violence, and then we're living in the nervous systems of all of that anxiety and all of the things that we're seeing on the screen. And so I think it's really critical. What I teach men is how to look at pornography critically, because if we're going to move beyond a pornographic mindset and being in a pornographic worldview, we have to be able to look at porn and be able to see it for what it is, which is, in my personal opinion, which is that it's commercializing our life force. And what I mean by that is like the porn companies and the AI companies and all of these companies that are creating pornography, they don't care about our goals and our dreams and our purpose and our families and our religion and our relational status. They see us as an IP address. They see what we're watching and they feed us more of what we're watching, because if we click on the button, then they get paid, and they don't give a flying fuck about our goals and dreams in life. And so therefore, if they're going to feed us violence and we're going to eroticize that, well, that's a very addictive thing for the brain, and we're going to continue to go back for more and more. So that's what's happening, big picture from my viewpoint.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And let's talk a little bit more about that kind of fantasy, because, I think for most men, porn is our sexual education. Our parents aren't talking about it in a way that goes beyond like, hey, be safe, use protection. Like we're not getting educated in school beyond anatomy, basically, is like what my sexual education was. But I think a lot of guys are learning about what it means to be with a woman through porn, which, like you said, contains a lot of violence, contains humiliation. I think it also puts like insane expectations on the woman, because the porn stars are like always down for sex. They're often like very initiatory, right? They're like very uninhibited, right? Like it's a different view as to what regular normal sex is. And what I've seen with some of my guys is like, if they're really deep in the porn world, when they go and have normal sex, they're like, what is this? Like, this is like way lamer. It's not what I expected. And they can sometimes get angry with their partner with that they're not performing, or it's not what they, were hoping it to be. So can you speak a little bit to that fantasy that gets created and how that impacts people in their relationships in the real world?
Yeah, before we jump into how that fantasy gets created, the very first thing I always ask men when I have a connection call is I say, hey, when you were coming of age, did you have any sound elder guidance in the department or in the area of sex and sexuality to talk to you about what is healthy sexuality and what is pornography and how to treat women and so on and so forth? And 99% of the men that come to me have absolutely none, right? So we are effectively left to our devices, left to the Playboys, the penthouses, and the porn. And the reason why I start there with men is because when we start talking about pornography, our entire protective systems come online, and we begin to, be like, oh my gosh, and we start to push back as men. It was what I've seen. And so the reason why I start there is I always say, hey, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you're watching porn and you're addicted to porn, or you have erectile dysfunction, or you have premature ejaculation, or you got these sexual issues and penis dysmorphia. You didn't have elder guidance, and in a perfect world, we would have been taken out into the jungle or the forest or the desert, and we would have gone through an actual male initiatory process to understand what healthy sexuality is. So that's my way of helping men to unshame it, so that they can open to the actual conversation at hand. And then from there, we can begin to, kind of weave back into your question, which is, how does the actual pornography program us to view sex and to view ourselves in relationship to the other? And what I see very, very clearly is that it's very, very much so focused on the male orgasmic experience. We've effectively been sold our own orgasms. And when they've commercialized us, we then commercialize ourselves and objectify ourselves. And then that becomes the way in which we view other people. So I teach a very simple mythopoetic map, is what I call it. And basically the map, although simple to understand, pretty large in terms of gravity. But basically what the map is that the way that a man treats his penis is the way that he treats everyone and everything in the world. And what I mean by that is that porn objectifies us and commercializes us. We then objectify and commercialize and colonize our own bodies, like our penis, we literally, I mean, how many men out there, I mean, if you're listening, have you ever taken it so far that your penis is bleeding or it's got a bruise on it, or it's like you're doing it so vigorously that you hurt yourself, right? So that's my reality. That's a lot of men's reality. And therefore, we don't even see that when we're treating ourselves that way, that's the psychological shit that gets projected out onto our partners. And then we end up seeing them as an extension of the way we see ourselves. And so then therefore we objectify the way in which we perform sex or the way in which we engage in it. So that's what I see big picture. And it's, it's terrifying, to be honest. So
yeah, that's really well said and really interesting. Can you go deeper on that? Is there an example, maybe either from your own life or from a client work or a composite client or something that can help this idea come alive? Because there's something there is a lot there.
There is. And, I'm not sure if have you guys gone deep into circumcision or not on the podcast? Have you ever talked about it or had anybody on the show? Okay. No. So I've gone deep into the weeds on circumcision. I was circumcised 3 hours after I was born. My father's generation, it was like 90% of men. Now it's about 55 to 60% of Americans are getting circumcised. So fortunately, we're going in the right direction, in my opinion. So the whole idea here is that, the way that a man treats his penis is how he treats the world, but the way that a boy's penis or an infant's penis was treated before he had any agency in life has an impact on the way that he treats it today. And so the idea here is that here we are, we're born, and all of a sudden somebody cuts off the most sensitive, most, pleasureful part of our penis. And then we're moving through life as we're coming into adolescence. And my whole take is that something's not right down there. Like something is astray, something's been taken from me against my will. And I think that where we're at, and this is more in the collective unconscious, but my experience is that injury, that initial mother wound, ultimately we come right out of our mothers and then we're clipped. It's like, well, now we don't feel safe in the world. And therefore, how does that impact the way that we treat our bodies and therefore treat the world? So for me, it's all tied to pre-egoic adolescent, infant psychology and the nature of how that impacts the way we treat our own bodies and the way that we ultimately interact with society. So, but getting back to your question about how to relate this to a client, I remember working with a man once, and I said, "Hey, have you ever apologized to your penis?" And he's like, "No. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Are you open to trying something that might be a little bit edgy, a little bit emotional potentially?" And he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And I said, "Okay, why don't you just take your hands and just place them down there on your balls and penis and just hold that for a moment and let me know when you're fully connected." And we did some 10 breaths into the space. And then I just said, "How about just saying I'm sorry? Just say it out loud or say it internally to your penis and just say I'm sorry." And he did. And then the floodgates just opened up. And in that process of apologizing to the way in which he was treating himself and effectively bullying his own penis or not treating it with any level of kindness and respect, almost like treating it as if it's not his own body, there was this massive, energetic release. And in that process, realizing, wow, like the amount of energy that is stored in the ignoring of our own boundaries within our own body and the way we treat it creates a tumultuous and tremendous amount of energetic, I guess you could say, pressure in the system, which, we just ejaculate out every time we get horny or we think we get horny versus if we were able to emote that energy. So yeah, that's a pretty deep one.
That's a good example. Yeah, it's a really good example. And I want to just build on that, right? Because you talk about the horny experience, and a lot of the guys I've worked with have this experience where being horny is uncomfortable, right? And like you said, the orgasm is a way to release that. Like it's not an enjoyable state for people, which I think is, a lot of guys don't talk about that, right? Because I think we're like, oh yeah, being horny is great. Like I love being all that, right? Like I love sex. Sex is awesome. But for a lot of guys, it's really complicated. It can feel like it's a performance. It can feel like it's like you have to kind of, like you said, relieve pressure in almost like a medicinal way. I think for a lot of guys, it's a big source of insecurity. So can you speak to to that, I guess, like kind of the issues that guys can have that we don't often talk about?
Yeah, there's this, thing that I've seen very common, I've worked with hundreds of men in and around the pornography thing, especially, and sort of there's this unconscious thing that happens where just because it gets hard doesn't mean, I always remind men, just because it gets hard doesn't mean that you need to, tug on it or rub it or, or masturbate. And so a lot of men, as soon as it gets to be hard, it's this uncomfortable experience, whether it's blue balls or they get pain there or they can't focus or they start looping or they're all kinds of images in their mind. And so then they just decide to release. And that's the sort of the loop that they're in, and they're kind of living in that sort of paradigm. And so what I help men to do is to learn sex transmutation, or to learn how to circulate those energies through the system. So there's a combination of somatic practices that I teach, from, somatic like trauma release exercises where you're doing shaking, to working with the root of the body, doing a lot of perineum squeezes and moving the energy up the spine into the brain, or moving it down the legs, or moving it into different energy centers, and putting that energy to good use. Because, when men come, there's an esoteric idea of what life force is, but I make it very scientific for them. And I break it down and I say, are you aware that there are proteins, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and sugars in your seminal fluid and in your prostate fluid? And every time you ejaculate, that energy and those minerals are leaving your body. And most men are not aware of that. And so I say, well, here's the thing that you need to be aware of. Those minerals and sugars and proteins, that it's a lot. And when it goes out too quickly, it pulls on the hypothalamus and the brain and our endocrine system to reproduce our seminal fluid and our semen. And, one of the things that the Taoist sort of practitioners and sexual alchemists will say is they'll say, 1 drop of semen is equal to 30 drops of blood. And I'm like, whoa, that's quite an interesting, thing that they teach. And so I just ask men straight up, I'm like, would you give blood every single day? And they're like, fuck no, I wouldn't give blood every single day. What would be the point of that? And I say, okay, well, then why do you masturbate every single day? And they go, I don't know. And I go, yeah, precisely. You've been sold your orgasms by the medical doctors who say you need to do this because you're going to have prostate cancer. And there's different ways to address that, from the pornography, from everything has been selling us our orgasms. And so why this is important is because if you are entrepreneurial, or if you have a career, or if you have a family, or if you want to work out, or any of the things that you want to do, you have to understand that the hypothalamus is literally the remote control of our life. And what I mean by that is it regulates our sleep, our hunger, our thirst, our body temperature, our memory, our focus, our drive. So when that energy is leaving our body too quickly and it pulls on the brain, then we're in lethargy, we're tired, we can't do anything. And then that leads to the other downstream effects, which is men grabbing, the sugar and the alcohol and the Adderall and the caffeine and the Netflix and everything else to pull themselves back up. So it makes like practical, common sense, logical, scientific, you are a 3D body sense to outgrow pornography, not because of all of the other things that it benefits in terms of being a better lover and so on and so forth, but just literally because you can't escape this 3D world. So let's be a steward of our life force effectively. So anyways.
I love that. I mean, I'm sold. There's a lot to go into there.
Marc, let me ask you one thing. When you were masturbating mindlessly, and when you were in, let's say, your own porn world, whatever that looked like, what was the lethargy, and what was your own experience being flatlined? What were the behaviors that you saw yourself doing that were also not in alignment or not healthy for you, like personally? Because every man is a little bit different. I reached for the croissants, other men reached for the Adderall. Like, what was your experience like? I feel curious.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I had the experience, kind of what I was saying before, where I didn't understand that horny was a good feeling. So I was just kind of releasing that. Actually, I did some tantra work later, in like my mid-20s, where I was learning some more of the stuff that I think you're talking about. But like early on, yeah, it was just like medicinal release. It was just like trying to, orgasm as fast as possible. I actually suffered from premature ejaculation for a while because I was trained, right, to like just come as fast as possible, get it over with, and get back to my life. But in that lethargy, I mean, I was smoking a lot of weed, was probably the biggest one. And for me, and I know for other guys, like weed and sexuality were highly tied, right? So I would like smoke a bunch of weed, watch porn, masturbate, and then like get the munchies, right? And that was like a fucking Saturday night in my life, you know? So it's kind of like co-occurring addiction, if you want to put it in clinical terms, but this kind of whole like cycle that I would go into around sexuality. And even after that, for me, drugs and sexuality were highly connected, right? Whether it be alcohol or marijuana or cocaine or ecstasy, right? I'm a recovering addict. I'm sober now, but for me, like those spaces, I was more comfortable having sex while I was intoxicated because I was awkward when I was sober. So a lot of my, not a lot, but a part of my recovery was learning how to be with women sober because I really had that experience for, call it like half of my 20s. Truly, I was always on something when I was having a sexual experience.
Yeah. Thank you for being so vulnerable around that. And I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of men where the marijuana pornography experience is so woven in, whether they watch the porn and then they smoke or they smoke and then watch the porn. And that's a whole other, as you mentioned, sort of that co-addiction where there's things that are happening simultaneously, but men don't often see them as, collaborating, or I guess you could say causing one another. So yeah, thank you for naming that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And like, I also studied the mythopoetic stuff. It sounds like you read some Robert Bly as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk about like mother wound, right, to go in a little tangent, right? Like my experience with marijuana is a lot of mother wound. It's like a very motherly drug where it's like, it's holding, it's very like soothing, it's very creative, like it's a very nurturing. And for me, it was a very nurturing space, but it wasn't real, right? It was still like artificially created, and it was tied to an object instead of being tied to an actual person. So again, it was difficult for me to have a sober relationship because I was getting those like feminine needs met, including sex, through weed, and weed is a lot more predictable than a human. It's very easy to control. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. All you need is like money and time. It's a lot less complicated than being in a relationship with a woman.
Yeah. And on that note, that pseudo attachment around porn and marijuana and mother wounding, I will honestly say that was when I started rejecting my mom. I remember it. As soon as I started watching porn, my mom used to come in, sing me a song, give me a little kiss, I had my little teddy bear and all that thing. And as soon as the porn happened, I just started rejecting mom and just being like, no. And I realized that the porn had a major impact on me rejecting my mother. And that caused a ton of downstream of impacts and effects in relationship to the way that I related with projecting mom onto my partners because I prematurely was, effectively like distancing from my mother. So it's interesting that you share that similar sentiment, or a little bit different, but it's like, wow, this happens a lot.
It happens a lot. Yeah. And I studied psychoanalysis, and something that gets thrown around that community is that attachment turns into eroticism. Right. And I think you're mentioning that at the beginning of the episode, right? Of like our old attachment wounds or attachment styles or all that stuff as we grow up becomes our erotic template. So when it starts off as non-sexual is right, like getting nurtured from your mom becomes sexual because it's a body, right? There's like, tits involved, right? There's like soothing involved. Yeah. There's all this attention, deep physical attention involved, and it becomes erotic. As puberty hits, and you get porn, you kind of get puberty a little bit earlier in some ways, because you start having those erotic feelings before your body is quite ready for them.
Yeah, I said so well. Absolutely. I feel curious, how did you pull yourself out of it? Did you go to therapy specifically for sexual and or pornography addiction, or when the other addictions started to go, did the porn start to leave as well? Because some men, it's the primary addiction, some men it's the secondary. So I'm just curious, like, what your experience was like.
Yeah, for me, drugs and alcohol was the main thing for sure. So a story 1,000 times, but just long story short, I had an overdose, and that kind of woke me up to needing to stop. So I did that, and then I realized a lot of things. Like I said, I didn't know how to talk to women. Didn't know how to have sex with women, didn't really know how to make friends because I had used drugs and alcohol as a crutch for basically everything in my life, and sex and sexuality being one of them. I then went to Boulder, studied at Naropa, which is like a Buddhist university, got into a little bit of the Tantra scene. So it's kind of like dabbled. You're definitely more of an expert than I am, but dabbled in some of that idea, which we can pivot into, right? This idea that like, for me, because I was switched to high stimulation, right? A lot of psychedelics, a lot of, cocaine, a lot of stimulants. And I was like, well, I need my sober experience to be pretty cool too. Like if I'm used to being tuned up all the time, if I was going to be sober, I wanted to get in touch with the more spiritual path, more deep, more like nuanced, experiences and things like that. So Tantra was like a good fit for me because I didn't want to just be boring, I guess. I wanted to like expand what was possible through like a healthier lens.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. So I wonder for you, right? Like you talk about, taking it to the next level, right? You mentioned a little bit about being multi-orgasmic, having a full body orgasm, being able to transmute energy. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, it's really common in the addiction world. It's like, okay, you get rid of your addiction, great, but like now what? Like what do you fill that hole with, and how do you can build a happy life beyond just being in those loops?
Yeah. So I kind of teach a body of work. So it starts with semen retention, and then it goes into outgrowing porn, and then it's the sex transmutation, which is the energetics, moving energy. And then I teach mindful masturbation, and then sexual reflexology, which is a lot of penis stretching and ball tapping and a number of other things, and then becoming multi-orgasmic. So it's sort of a trajectory from addiction to fully alive. I I joke around by saying where I take men is from, an ejaculatory sneeze, like, meh, to like, right? So really moving from this secrecy, silence, and shame into this like full embodiment of the sexual experience where the love itself is what you're aiming for, as opposed to the act of sex, where life becomes quite arousing and erotic, not just the actual sexual experience, but where you become more erotic with all of nature and all of, of life as a whole. But, to answer your question more literally, I will say a lot of men come to me with premature ejaculation issues because, again, the way that they masturbate translates directly to the way that they actually show up as a lover. The way you masturbate is often in effect how you expect sex to go and how long it lasts, has this sort of relationship. And most men last about 5 to 7 minutes, and they want to last about 10 to 13. But from my experience, premature ejaculation has nothing to do with time. So the way I teach it is that ejaculatory choice is about choosing when you ejaculate. So any time that you ejaculate before you choose to would be a premature ejaculation. So what I mean specifically by that is it could be 2 minutes in, it could be 2 hours in, it could be 2 days in. And ultimately, what I'm really calling awareness to is that when you take the ejaculation off the table and you learn how to move energy through your body with your spine, and you know how to breathe, and you have range from like the slowest, what I call sloth sex, to the most intense, what I would call the integrated dark masculine sort of sex. Like if you can have that range and your voice is open and you can move energy through your spine, then you can really reach into these experiences that feel a lot like psychedelic ego death experiences, where you're legitimately having a full-blown egoic death, but you don't even release, and you're just cosmically shifted and changed in your perception of what is possible.
If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us to reach more men and inspire them to become the best versions of themselves. Thank you for your support. And now back to the show. Tell me about the like cosmic egoic psychedelic shift, right? I mean, do you have like a cosmology around that, or what do you think happens on those different spiritual realms?
Yeah, so I'll say that my experience has been that a lot of men won't begin the process of exploring this until they're in a relationship, and then they get there and they're like, hey, I can't get there. And so where I will always start men is start with your mindful masturbation practice. If you can't take yourself there, then you're not going to be able to take a woman there or another man there or yourself there in an actual sexual shared experience, because the energy is going to be so much more intense. And likely your nervous system is not going to be wired in a way that doesn't just short out with with an ejaculation. So, the very first experience that I ever had in this realm was I lived in Southeast Asia, and I had to do 30 days of no masturbation, because I actually had a bladder issue. And so I had like pins and needles through my urethra, and like I had interstitial bladder cystitis, which was like a family condition that got set off by a condom. So when I got into this work, it wasn't because I thought it was trending or cool. It was literally, I was forced to not watch porn or masturbate because it was like, hurt so bad.
Issue, yeah.
Yeah, medical issue. And so when I finally decided to masturbate without thinking about porn and watching porn or being with somebody, I just stared at the moon, actually. And as I was staring at the moon, I just started channeling energetically with the energy that was coming through or from, however you want to look at it. And that was when I had my first real orgasm, where I literally, like, my body lost control. And it was an ejaculatory orgasm, but it was one of those experiences where, like, I realized in that moment that I was one fucking orgasm away from the rest of my life, meaning that experience was so life-changing, because I realized that my whole life I was using masturbation and sex to feel better. And finally, I had reached a place where sex and masturbation was a means to better feel. And when you make that shift from thinking your way to orgasm to feeling your way, over here you have your orgasms, but over here your orgasms have you realize, oh my gosh, there's a whole other way to relate to this vessel, this soul, the body, and to what I would call, eco-eroticism, or the capacity to connect your sexuality back into cosmology and not just into psyche. So it's an interesting way to think about it, but yeah, I love it. And that's what I teach now. And men come to me and they go, what can I do? And I go masturbate outside. And they're like, what? I'm like, have you ever done it? And they're like, yeah. I was like, how was it? They're like, oh, I liked it. Like, when's the last time you did it? Oh, long time. Or no, I've never done it. I'm like, go try it. Go sit into a river and then go up on a rock and allow the sun to hit you and actually feel into the experience. And just that simple shift can be a remarkable transformation for a man if he's never tried it. So
that's interesting. I'm going to use that with my clients. Yeah. Because I think I go as far as like, masturbate without porn, right? Trying to focus on just the physical sensation, trying to focus on, like, even if it's self-generated fantasy, but something that you're just like disconnecting from technology. But you're right. There's like a whole like pathway beyond just that. I think it takes a level of surrender, right? Like you said, allowing your orgasms to have you and allowing yourself to like surrender to that moving energy as it courses through you.
Yeah. And recently I was out in Austin, Texas. I flew in 17 guys to do a sexual alchemy training. And I don't need to get undressed and get a hard on in order to show what it looks like. But I got myself in the middle and I had like a dildo. So I like kind of showed the actual experience. So if you have like one hand on your cock and then you put, your other hand either on your root chakra or your sacral, or you kind of move up your body, you can actually start to clear your energy centers. Oh. And so like in that experience, as I was laying on my back, I was showing the waves in my spine and the way that my voice works to demonstrate what it looks like, because most men have never, porn's not going to show it to you, but most men have never seen another man access the energetics of what moving sexual energy through your body looks like. And I wasn't necessarily moving sexual energy, but I was just kind of demonstrating how it could look or it could feel if you were to kind of play around with it yourself. So I do a lot of demonstrations in order to help men unlock the North Star, and then they can go home and play around with it effectively.
So, yeah, I think that's great, because when you said the sexual sneeze, I think it's what a lot of guys, it feels like, right? It's just like a release. It takes like a fraction of a second and then you're done. There isn't any kind of like aftershock or real opening. It's like, okay, that's often there's shame, right? I talk to a lot of guys that have porn. It's like the shame immediately, where like you kind of get that post-nut clarity and you're like, what am I doing? I'm sitting here in the dark, looking at my phone, looking at some like degenerate shit. Like, what the fuck is this about? So again, like wires the brain together to associate, orgasm with shame and with like feeling weak. Versus, like, I think the model you're putting forth is it's a real source of strength and power and spiritual energy beyond the physical as well.
Oh, yeah. I call it masturbation as a death practice. And so basically, I stare at men with a question and I say, if it were the last time you were going to masturbate and you knew you were going to die tomorrow and you wanted to do it intentionally, mindfully, and make it as pleasurable as possible, how would you do it differently than the way that you're currently doing it? And so what I do is I have men sit with that. And then I attune them to environment, whether that's nature or whether it's, ambiance in their room, some music, some lotion, some toys, like whatever it might be, breath work, massage, self-massage. And then in addition to all of the actual treating your whole body as a pleasure zone, not just your cock, like after you've had your experience, whether it's ejaculatory or non-ejaculatory, sit for a bit, like allow yourself to have the pleasure. Like it's yours. You don't need to, run and take care of it and, go to bed. And basically I build my life from those portals because I only masturbate once a month on the full moon. And when I release, I also sit in that experience for close to 30 minutes and I meditate. I let all of that information come through and then I'll journal and I'll kind of build my life from those portals. So I really call that sex magic, but it's not necessarily something that anybody taught me. It's just something that in my celibacy journey, because I did almost 3 years of celibacy. It was 2 years and 9 months. And in that portal of doing that, sitting with myself, torching through all the karma, working through all the energetics of all of the grief that I hadn't actually felt, then I was able to come to this place of realizing like, oh shit, like these portals, this is prayer, right? It's not sign of the cross, going to church and taking communion. This is you connecting to your own body, your own spirit, your own psyche, and then building your life from this magical portal that everybody has access to. And yet at the same time, we don't self-initiate because we're just given the porn. And so I always say to every man, like, this isn't about us coming together and doing it in a circle. That'd be a little strange. This is about you initiating yourself into your own self-pleasure practice that is the integration of your masculine and feminine energies, as opposed to outsourcing the feminine to somebody else effectively. So,
yeah. So let's riff on that a little bit, right? Because I think from the mythopoetic lens, right, initiation is a huge idea. For listeners out there, if you haven't heard that, basically it's like transition from boy to man, often done by, not often, always done by other men, by older men, right? Kind of leading guys through an experience, a retreat, I don't know, being on the woods with a stick, fighting a jaguar, whatever, right? These ideas that we have. And it sounds like you do that work. It sounds like you said you just did that retreat in Austin. So I'm curious, like, what do you think young men need in this realm? What would initiatory experience look like for, a teenager that wants a healthier sexual education?
A teenager, I think it's important that we don't push teenagers and just in general people beyond where they're at. I think we can overwhelm with too much information. But I think in general, the vision that I have for the group that I'm building, I call it Life Force. That's the name of it, is that at Life Force, ideally, as we progress and build this into an international community, then fathers that are either, having boys now or their boys are coming of age, there is these little portals where they can come with their sons, and there can be father-son initiatory practices where boys not only come together and have fire circles where they can ask the men the questions that they want to ask, but they can learn the breath practices. They can learn what is sex, what is it about, and then also they can have time to go alone into the forest or the jungle or wherever they're going to go and spend some time connecting to themselves in ultimately a way where they're actually connecting to their sexuality before they've watched pornography or before they've been infiltrated by all of these images about what it should be or what it shouldn't be. And if a man can do that, then it's more likely that the way in which they will engage in sexual experience would also be from that place where they're not being programmed for it to be a particular way, so that we can get back to maybe where we were, hundreds or even thousands of years ago, where people met, but they, the first experiences that they had was completely, rooted in just feeling and experiencing and exploring the bodies between two individuals versus so many boys now watching porn, or like you and I, before we've even had sexual experiences in the 3D physical world, right? Because that's so deleterious to like the nature of what we expect sex to be, or how we project onto our partner to, shave their vagina or whatever it might be. That is just something that we've observed. You see what I mean? So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think having that unbrainwashed experience is critical. Because yeah, like my experience, I mean, I'd watched porn for 5, I don't know, maybe even 10 years, I mean, before I actually had sex, you know? And so coming into sex, I was already programmed into thinking it should be a certain way and should feel a certain way and it should be a certain way, and not having any kind of like guide. And I love your idea of kind of like, you know, bringing the shadow into the consciousness, you know, not having it be this like weird taboo thing that's underneath the surface, but being something that's just part of being an adult, you know, and part of being a man that we need to be talking about way more. Because it does, you know, sounds like for you when you're in your addiction, for many men, like it can run our lives. You know, it can be such a central pillar that we never really talk about at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, the tagline that I have created for Life Force is men's work that doesn't leave sex at the door. Nice. And the idea about that is understanding that the majority of men's work and men's groups that are on planet Earth today effectively just say, no, we're going to just ignore that big, huge elephant. And we're going to come together and we're going to roo-rah and we're going to do all this trauma release shit. And it's amazing that we're doing that. But at the same time, what would it look like to put sexuality at literally the focal piece, like the focal lens of how we are approaching personal development, you know, from every angle, relationally, financially, business related, grief. Like if we put sex as the thing that we focus on, all of a sudden everything else starts to open in a different way. And so that's really the aim that I think that men's work needs to go. And that's what I'm, you know, doing and trying to pioneer, because it's, as you mentioned, it's a huge pillar to the way in which we live our lives, and we're just not aware of it, or we don't want to acknowledge it effectively. So
right. And something that like is not understood, the male orgasm, like it's not really talked about or understood or really gone into much more depth, other than like, yeah, being the final scene in a porn, you know, clip, right? I mean, that's really all it is. But yeah, it's something that makes us undeniably male, is the ability to have a male orgasm, is having a penis, right? Is like interacting with the male body. So I do think it's absolutely critical that men's work needs to talk about that, because that is a huge part of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Have you done some men's work? Like, have you been in men's circles and done group work before, or led it, or what's your experience?
Oh yeah. My company is that. So we're Men's Therapy Online, where we do men's work. We do 3 retreats a year. You know, I've done Mankind Project. I've been in a men's group for like over a decade. So done tons of retreats. So pretty well versed in this idea. And I think you're right. I think most of them don't talk about sexuality. There are some for sure that bring it in, but I think most, and I think more of the stuff that's in like hustle culture, where I've done some of those retreats, to talk about it all, right? Because that's all about like power. It's all about like, you know, money, status, grind set, all that kind of stuff, which is good. But when you talk about life force, like sexual power and sexual life force is a critical part of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How do you guys incorporate it in? Do you guys do any workshops or conversations around sexuality? Like, have you incorporated it at all, or?
Yeah, so we don't do any specific workshops around it. We do men's groups, and it's on the table. We bring it up. You know, I'm bringing questions back to that a lot. There's a lot of guys that work with me that do struggle with porn and sex addiction, or struggle with, you know, relationship dynamics. And one of the first questions I ask is like, how's your sex life? You know, like what's happening in the bedroom? Like, can we pattern that on top of what's happening with your wife or your girlfriend or your partner or whatever, you know? So we're bringing it in that way, but we haven't done a specific retreat on it yet. But it'll be something in the future, certainly, to add.
I would challenge you to do it.
Yeah.
And if you want to have somebody to help co-facilitate, hit me up. I would absolutely be totally down to collaborate on any level around these things, because it's one of the core questions that I basically ask is what are the boys asking of us as men who are creating the culture and the nervous systems of what they are inheriting? And so for me, I don't see there being any more bigger work than us dialing our own sexual health and well-being, because our boys, they're in direct relationship to the ways in which our heads are on a swivel and we're objectifying, and, you know, they see us in the way that we treat our partners, our wives, our mothers, and they're just picking up like on all of that. They're just little sponges, you know. And now that it's been 9 years since I've watched porn as academic, you know, research, but being out of porn for 9 years, it is so amazing to go out into the world. I was just at a festival, and to be able to observe the world, but not have my head on a swivel, objectifying every single person and assessing whether they're a sexual partner or a potential sexual partner. Because I didn't realize how much bandwidth and life force I was leaking just because of how much I was exhausting myself by being out in the world and assessing every single individual that ever walked through no matter how old they were, like assessing whether they were attractive or not. I mean, it's just exhausting. So
it is exhausting. Yeah, and I'll certainly hit you up. Like, it's not an area I feel a particular expertise in, but I do co-facilitate and I bring in experts for the retreats and things like that. So I can be your phone, so I'll definitely let you know about that. Yeah, because I'm curious. I'm sure you've read the like David Data and Way of Superior Man, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So like that was a big thing for me, where he talks about like tasting the feminine or experiencing the feminine, right? If like a hot chick walks past you and you're just like feeling that energy, versus what I think a lot of guys do, and I certainly have done and still do sometimes, right? Is like objectifying and going straight to fantasy or going to evaluation or like pulling out the sexual spreadsheet or whatever, right? Versus like actually just taking in that energy of another human in front of you. And that was a big mindset shift for me, of having an erotic experience that wasn't objectifying, and wasn't outcome focused. And it was just rooted in the presence. And it was a big part of mindfulness practice, just to be like, oh, okay, here's the experience of being around someone I'm attracted to, versus like, what am I going to do? How am I going to sleep with them? How are we going to make this work? Can I, right? Having this whole almost like anxiety response versus just the like somatic response of being in the presence of someone that I like.
Yeah. Yeah, I teach men that all the time, how to look at a woman through the back channel instead of the predatory part of the eye, which goes forward, how to bring it in and then squeeze the perineum or push it down and bring the energy and, bring a woman into the heart space. And understanding, if you look at Wilhelm Reich's work, he's the one that, kind of was the grandfather of somatic therapy. But, when you look at what he sort of pioneered, he basically was able to take science and do a lot of like heart research in terms of heart rate variability. And he was able to see that men experience arousal and fear in the same way. So what he was basically saying is if you're sitting on the edge of a cliff and you're looking over the edge, your heart's going to start racing, no different than when a man sees a woman that he's attracted to. The only difference is that when you are attracted to somebody, your erection's going to rise and your mouth's going to get watery, versus if you're on the edge of a cliff, your mouth gets dry and your penis sucks into your body. But the commonality is the heart, right? That's that anxious experience. And so what I help men to do is to like, okay, if you see somebody that you're attracted to, can you just plant your feet firm on the ground and be with the arousal and breathe that into the heart space and ground it? And then from there, kind of not objectify it and take it home for the spank bank later, but literally just like pull it in. And then from there, if you just choose to approach, you can walk over and just say hello. And that skill set, a lot of men come and they want to attract a partner, right? That's something that is important to them, but they're so terrified because for so many years they've been in that objectification and they've masturbated to all of this imagery. And so they don't even feel worthy or they have so much shame around that they can't even approach and have a real relationship with somebody that they find attractive. So
I think, I think a lot of guys are like that. They're like studs in the porn world, right? But like are completely terrified in the real world, right? Unable to approach, unable to have a conversation, unable even to make eye contact. And like, I think that like gap, right? That dissonance, it's got to fuck with the brain, right? I mean, there's like, it's such like a weird identity thing of in one world, you're just like, having sex with anyone in any way you want. And then in another world, you can't even have, say hi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, eye contact that's one of the things that I say on my landing page. Like, hey, if you outgrow porn, you're going to be able to have better eye contact, not only with others, but when you walk into the mirror and you say good morning to yourself, that you can actually look at yourself in the eye and be like, hey, man, how's it going? I mean, like a lot of men can't. I do a lot of psychedelic work, but a lot of it is psychedelic mirror work because a lot of the journey of getting to know yourself is about really connecting to who you are through the eyes. And it's a tricky thing for many men with porn addiction, especially.
Yeah, because it just hits that shame. I'm curious from your opinion, like, is there any amount of porn use that's healthy, or maybe a broader question is like, what would a healthy masturbatory practice or porn practice or something look like for like the average man, right? The guy who isn't going all the way deep into Tantra or making it a huge pillar of their life, but does want to take a meaningful step forward in this arena?
Sure. So I'll answer it two ways, as a couple and then as a single man.
Right.
So the first thing that I'll say is if you're in a couple, or if you have a partner and you like pornography, then my advice to people is roll your own, roll your own porn, and don't ever fucking upload it to the internet. You know what I mean? No. So in other words, keep it very, very safe. This is, instead of calling it pornography, I call it rolling your own erotica, which is to say that there's something so beautiful about rolling your own and then watching it back and then learning about how you're breathing, how you're showing up. Are you rushing, whatever? And it can be a very beautiful spark if it's between you and your partner. So that's one piece. As it relates to single men, I would say you can, of course, record yourself, having your own self experiences. I do a lot of masturbation, and I teach this as well in the mirror. And you can do mirror work in the, where you're masturbating in the mirror. You can even set up a recording of yourself, and you can watch that back. That's an interesting thing because you start to learn how you're showing up. But I would say, like, if you're going to consume pornography, my thing is when men are moving off of hardcore visual porn, I move them to audio pornography. So there's this type of pornography where women are just pleasuring themselves or men are pleasuring themselves, and you can listen to it. And instead of thinking your way to orgasm, you begin to listen and you begin to feel your way. And so I prefer to help men to kind of take a step into the audio pornography. And there's a really cool thing where it's called the 100-to-1 challenge, where women and men will masturbate and they'll just count down from 100. And when they get to 0, they ejaculate or they have their orgasm or whatever. And in my experience, that's where there's almost very little to no programming because it's just them counting and arousing themselves. And I think that can be a really good step. The other thing that I'm working on is there's a woman in the UK named Emma Spiegler. I'm having a call with her on Friday, and she makes conscious masturbation practices for men, meaning she records these pleasure practices where she's guiding you through your own experience. And so you're listening to her. And so her and I are going to collaborate on how to effectively create ways for men to more sensually connect to their bodies. So I think that those types of relating is where I would point people, just if they don't know. And then there's obviously all that porn that's ethical. I went to a blog one time and I opened up every ethical blog or every ethical porn site that was on this blog. There was like 25. Some of it was just the same as all other porn. It was just fucked up shit. But there were a couple, women-owned, women-created stuff where it's rather sensual and it's not, there's love that exists between the people that are actually having it. And so I'd say if you're moving away from it, there are some steps that can be helpful as you're progressing towards moving away from it entirely. So, yep.
That's great. That's a really good resource. I'll direct people to you for those links as well, because I think it's helpful to take one step. Because I think for a lot of guys, this can feel really intimidating or feel really weird or bring up a lot of shame. So I'm curious, as we're wrapping up, are there any other quick things that someone could do, right? Or something that is step one on this path if they feel inspired by the conversation that they've just listened to?
Yeah. The very first thing I do with the men that are in my men's group is I say, go buy a massage gun.
Okay.
Massage guns. Yeah, Theragun, absolutely. Theraguns are a little bit intense because some of them only have one speed.
Yeah, that's true.
Full blast is because what I do is I teach men how to use it in the pelvic floor region. So using it under your balls, between your balls and your anus and in through the legs. And you can start to really move and liberate a lot of sexual energy that's just stuck there. And so doing self-massage is the most important thing. If you're out there and you're listening, you can put it down in that region, do the back of the vagus nerve. I'm trained as a massage therapist, so I do a lot of psychedelic facilitation with massage. And I always start with the massage gun because it allows for so much energy to dissipate so that you can feel safe in your own nervous system. And then you can also incorporate that into your pleasure practice as well as kind of the beginning step, which also feels just fantastic.
It's very cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah. So My website's not quite done yet, but on Instagram and Facebook, you can find me at Tyson Adams. On Instagram, Tyson Adams, 2 underscores, and follow and shoot me a DM. And yeah, I'm running No Nut November, which is obviously coming up in November. So basically, it is semen retention all the way through sexual mastery. So I'll be reopening, and if you're interested, hit me up, and we can jump on a call. So
that's great. Yeah, all this stuff will be in our show notes. And don't take them on the No Nut November challenge. I think if you are curious, trying like a 30-day challenge is a great place to start, and just running as a science experiment. As I talk to a lot of my guys, it's like, just try it, right? 30 days, who cares, right? See what it's like. See if you have some of the stuff that Tyson's been talking about. If you have more energy, if you have more clarity, if you find yourself fantasizing less, if you have reduction in anxiety, if your sexual issues just go away, it could be really powerful. So definitely follow him on all that stuff. Also follow us. So Men's Therapy Podcast on everything, Men's Therapy Online. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. And don't forget to visit menstherapy.online to learn more about the work that we are doing to support and inspire men. Until next time, keep moving forward.